This episode of Now This Is Lit is brought to you by Audible. Check the link in the description to get your first Star Wars audiobook free. Everyone loves free things. Click that link. Do it. This show is also brought to you by our patrons. If you want to support the show in a different way, with just $1 a month, you can join our Patreon at patreon.com/StarWarsLitPod. You can get a sticker. You can get access to an exclusive show that we do every month that's wild and chaotic and fun and something you can only get by becoming a member of the Patreon. There'll be so many more perks very, very soon. But for now, do you want a sticker? Do you want a sticker that has a Now This Is Lit logo? Because it's fantastic and I love them. But I also want to give them away because there's just a stack of stickers on my desk. So if you want one, $1 a month. Patreon.com/StarWarsLitPod. A long time ago in a galaxy far, far away. You're listening to Now This Is Lit, a podcast about Star Wars books, the people who make them, and the readers who just can't get enough of them. I'm your host, Meg Dowell. I use she, her pronouns. And today I have a very fun interview with Eric Smith. He's a literary agent. You may have heard of him because of his Beginner's Guide to IP Publishing. That's how he got on my radar about a year ago, I think. Knowing a lot about IP in publishing, I thought it would be fun to talk about that with him, and so that's what we did. This is a great conversation, and you might consider it a pilot episode for a future series that I want to do on this show, and that is all I will say about that. But if you like this kind of stuff, if you like knowing more about how publishing kind of works behind the scenes, let me know, and maybe we'll talk about it more in the very near future. I hope you enjoy this interview. We'll start with, for those who don't know and want to know more about publishing and how kind of all of the pieces fit together. As a literary agent, why don't you tell me a little bit about what you do?
Yeah, absolutely. So literary agents, oh goodness. I mean, we do a lot, but
Yes.
the primary thing you'll often hear when you're asking like, oh, well, what does a literary agent do? Is that we shepherd authors' books to the publishers, right?
Yeah.
So it's our job to help get an author's book into the best shape it can be in. Although ideally it shows up in our inbox in very good shape.
Yeah.
And then we pitch it to the editors who we think would be really in to that particular book, right? After the book is hopefully purchased by the right editor who we find for it, that's when a lot of the sort of behind the scenes stuff happens that maybe isn't necessarily on the surface when you hear about an agent, right? So we get into digging into the contracts. After the book makes its way through, we start working on things like subrights. So selling an author's audiobook rights, selling foreign rights, taking that book to film and TV agents and trying to find a home for it in the adaptation space, right? During all of that, we're also working with the author on what their next book is going to be and what their career is potentially going to look like. We are staying in touch with the publisher regarding publicity and marketing and all that stuff that they're doing behind the scenes to make sure the book is successful. So we get to meddle a whole lot. We try to exploit as many rights as we can for our authors so they can have a flourishing career and so that their books do really well and find their readers. And then we help them develop their careers and keep pushing them out there book after book.
Yeah, that's a lot. You guys do a lot.
Yeah, it's a bundle of things, but we love it. Like if you ask any agent, so much of this business is it's very personal, right? Like we get to know all these editors really well. Of course, we get to know our clients. I don't know. It brings me a lot of joy reaching out to editors who I'm like, oh, I know this person is going to love this project because I know them very well as a person.
Yeah.
I don't know. It's really nice.
I love that. Um,
Also, dear listeners, you may hear my child running around right now, and that's just that's just gonna happen. And as an apology, I'll tell you a story about my kid in Star Wars later on.
oh, I love that. I was just telling someone the other day, actually, I don't mind dog interruptions, cat interruptions, child interruptions because it just makes it feel like we're just hanging out,
Oh yeah.
chilling. I actually love it. That was, I don't know if you heard my dog just now, but there we go. She knew I was talking about her. She knew. She knew. Um, so for a writer who might at any point be interested in pursuing IP, which we'll talk about what that means in a second. Why is having an agent in that situation an important thing, ideally?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. I guess it depends on where you are in your writing career, right?
Mm-hmm.
So a lot of authors who come to me who already have an IP project in hand are generally nonfiction authors, right? So
Yeah.
IP, just really quick, is intellectual property, right? So sometimes a publisher will say like, oh, we really want to do a book about this specific pop culture moment, or we really want to do a nonfiction guide about horoscopes or something. They'll find an author who has a platform that's been actively writing about these things, see if they want to do a book. Usually that answer is yes. And then they say, okay, great, go find an agent to handle this contract. The good publishers will do that, right?
Yeah.
Because they
Yeah.
they want they want you to be taken care of. They
Yeah.
genuinely do. And then an agent will step in to help out there. When it comes to authors who don't have agents yet and are just sort of like, I don't know, getting ready to pitch their first book, or sort of exploring the space and potentially want to do IP and get pitched to IP, it's great to have an agent who does that for you, right? So as a literary agent, I will often put together these packets that are like, hey, meet the author, right? And it'll be a bio, it'll be some of their sample writing, there'll be a letter about what the author wants to write and what they're interested in. And then I'll send it out to the editors who work on IP projects, right? I'll send it out to the editors who work on Marvel titles. I'll send it out to the editors who work on Star Wars books. And that's when the editors will often reach out later on and be like, hey, remember that author you introduced to me? I think we have a project for them.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, and that's how we secure IP projects for authors. Oh boy. Hold on. Okay. So that's how we secure those IP projects for authors. Otherwise, it otherwise it can be really hard to get them on your own, right? Because how do you have access to those editors, right? Those
Right.
editors don't necessarily know you.
Right.
Um, But then sometimes this really interesting thing happens in the middle of all of that, between like the author who has a platform in a specific space and also wants to write fiction in that world.
Mhm.
There's a writer who I adore quite a bit named Preeti Chibber, who
Yes.
everyone should look up. She
Yes.
writes Spider-Man, she writes YA, she's done some Star Wars books, and her story is that, and I'm quite positive she has written about this, and I think I've written about it on my website. She was talking about Spider-Man absolutely everywhere. She's written about it for Sci-Fi, for the Mary Sue, for all these great places. And the publisher came to her, and they were like, "Hey, how would you like to write a Spider-Man book?"
Ah.
That happens sometimes, doesn't happen all the time.
Yeah.
It's a good idea to have an agent to pitch you.
Yeah.
That was a
So
really long answer. I hope that's okay.
no, I love that. Because there are it doesn't happen the same way for everyone. And
Yes.
it's good to know kind of like the different routes that can be taken or different ways that it happens for different
Mhm.
people because it anyone who kind of wants to get into publishing, particularly in this space, going in, it can be very overwhelming because you might know a little bit about how it works, but also it's like, but you might hear someone say, oh, this is how I did it, and not realize, oh, but there's other ways it could also happen.
Oh
And then
yeah.
you have to do this, and this. It's a lot. I don't say that from personal experience yet, but it's a lot. Um, so fans who read Star Wars books might know, and who might follow other franchises might know what IP means, or they might know that Star Wars is falls under that category. How does working with, let's just say Star Wars, for example, how's that different for you and for your authors than something else?
So how is it different from, say, like an original project?
Yeah.
Maybe. Yeah, I mean, it differs because there's like a character Bible, right? There's like a
Yeah.
lore Bible.
Yeah.
There's all this stuff that's been already firmly established. So
Right.
even though you're playing in somebody else's sandbox, like you don't own all the toys, right? Like
Yeah.
they're not
Right.
they're not yours to play with necessarily. So there's a lot of cooks in the kitchen, and
Yeah.
I've seen this with books, the Marvel books. I've seen this with Star Wars books. I've seen this with a number of IP projects where like you're writing out the story, you're writing out the outline, the publisher and the team has a potential vision for what it's going to be, and you spend a lot of time bouncing that stuff back and forth off of the team there. They have to approve certain things, they say yes or no to decisions that you want to make.
Yeah.
So it's just not you behind your computer like banging out your vision. It's
Right.
sharing it with a lot of people.
So you talked a little bit about how a couple different ways that authors kind of come to work on these projects. Yeah, sometimes they're sought out and sometimes not. What do you think is like the most common, if that exists? The most like the path that maybe most authors who end up writing IP follow.
Yeah. I mean, if we're talking about IP for fiction, so like Star
Yeah.
Wars and things like that, I think the most common is the publisher reaches out to the agent after the agent has talked to the
Okay.
publisher about that author a bunch, right?
Yeah.
Um, that's how you get put on the radar.
Yeah.
It usually happens after you've had a couple of books come out.
Right.
Um, I'm pretty sure that's the most common route.
Yeah.
Maybe someone will disagree. It's very possible, but that's how it's been in my situation. I'm lucky. I work with Mike Chen, who has done. He did a book called Star Wars Brotherhood that did very well.
Yeah.
And then I have a bunch of authors who have been in those really lovely Star Wars from a certain point of view anthologies. And all those authors, I pitched them little meet the author packets to the teams over there, and that's one of the ways we get there. Though Mike is a funny story. He was also very firmly on the radar of the Star Wars team because he was writing about the prequels and how much he loved them and how it was a little frustrating to him that some people didn't like them because he loves those movies.
Yeah.
And that's another one of the ways he came on the radar of them. He has some really great articles on I think it was the Mary Sue about that.
Nice. Yeah, he's doing some really good stuff. Yes. So if you haven't read anything Mike Chen has done, Star Wars or otherwise, highly recommend you do that.
Yes, please.
What is your essential, let's say, advice for anyone out there who loves Star Wars, who loves books, who maybe has some writing experience, and maybe wants to write fiction, nonfiction, Star Wars at some point? What are maybe a couple things they should be doing to maybe get on that radar or to take steps toward doing what they want to do?
Yeah. Agents certainly help, right? Like
Yeah.
they're the ones who are going to get you in front of those editors.
Yeah.
If it's the nonfiction space you're interested in, I always tell everybody to build up a platform in that space by regularly publishing in that space. I work with one author, Amy Ratcliffe, who has done, she's wonderful. She's written a bunch of Star Wars nonfiction that is all over the place. But if you look her up, she was the editor-in-chief of Nerdist. She's written for numerous outlets. She's a journalist in the geek space, right? And I really feel like nonfiction and platform building through publication versus social media is something that it's never too late to do it, right? Like you want to be in that space. you should be happy to be in that space in other places, right? So
Yeah.
building up your platform in nonfiction is a great way to do that. But with fiction, it's I would say get that agent, sell that first book, and then have them put you on the radar there. Because I know very few writers who debut with IP. It does happen in terms of
Mhm.
some novels, but like yeah, not with Star Wars and
Yeah.
Marvel as much.
Yeah.
I have seen it, but it is not often.
Yeah. Kind of got to have that platform, so to speak, or
Yeah.
just have that previous. I've done a book. I can
Yes.
do it.
And please don't write an original Star Wars book or Marvel book and then try to pitch it to agents. I see that happen sometimes, and like we can't. Like they don't like those teams don't take those unsolicited ideas. So like I wouldn't be able to sign something that you don't really have permission to write.
Yeah.
So don't do that. I understand the urge, but don't do it.
Yeah. Anything else our listeners should know about you, about anything at this stage of the
Yeah.
process?
Yeah, I mean, I've been an agent for about 10 years. I've worked on a lot of fun IP things. It brings me a lot of joy and it
Mm.
is it is really wonderful. But if you do get approached to do an IP project, make sure you get an agent. Not all IP comes with, you know, significant royalties. Sometimes it's work for hire and
Mm.
sometimes your agent can get in there and negotiate things so it's a
Yeah.
little more fair. Um, Let me see. And I guess my little story that I wanted
Yeah.
to tell that when you heard my kid is that so Star Wars Brotherhood, Mike Chen's Star Wars novel. He didn't tell me he was doing this, but when I was reading the book, I burst into tears around chapter 3 because Anakin and Obi-Wan go to Planet Langston. Planet Langston is named after my son, Langston, and I
Oh.
had no idea he was going to do that.
Oh.
And he made my son Star Wars canon. You can see Planet Langston in Wikipedia and all these other places now. Right now he's 6, so I don't think he quite understands what any of that means, but I'm hoping when he's older, he will think it is very cool. So,
Oh, I love that. That's wonderful. Writers are great.
oh yes, especially Mike. What a guy.
Yes. Yes. I need to talk to him at some point. I will.
Oh,
Yeah. Oh, it's like every author I talk to is like, yeah, I like Star Wars, I like books. That's like
yeah.
that's why we're here. Um, well, this has been absolutely wonderful. I am so glad that we were able to talk about we haven't really talked about this on the show. And we talk a lot about the books themselves, and I've talked to, a couple editors and things like that, but like it's interesting to dive into like, oh, like before there was a Star Wars book, there was a writer who wanted to write one.
Yeah.
And eventually it happens, but this is one of the pieces that has to come together, or that often comes together, before that happens. So,
Yeah.
yeah, I hope that, listeners enjoy something a little bit, different. But it was really great to talk to you, and I will link your, your beginner's guide to writing IP, because
Excellent.
it is just so helpful for anyone who might want to do that, or might want to at some point down the road and be like, well, here's kind of how it works, what I might want to start thinking about doing eventually.
Mhm.
It's very good. So thank you for doing
Oh,
that.
please. My
Yeah.
pleasure.
And if yeah, don't know where I was going with that, but this has been this has been great. And I am so glad that we got to do it. So thank you
Yes.
for joining me.
Oh, please. Thank you for having me. And yeah, anyone who's out there writing, good luck. Keep at it. And yeah, say hi sometime.
Yay. Now This Is Lit is part of the Faraway Fandom Network. It is produced by Devor Montum and written, hosted, and edited by me. Jose Jimenez designed our podcast art. You can keep up with the show on Substack and Now This Is Lit, and find the show wherever you get your podcasts. There are so many ways you can support the show, and all of those ways are linked in the show description. The newest way is to become a member of our Patreon. For $1 a month, you can get access to an exclusive show and a sticker. And if we get 500 people to support the Patreon per month, I can hire an editor. That would be great for me, and maybe for you too. So if you'd like to support the show with just $1 a month, you can do it that way. Or you can just keep listening and sharing the episodes. That is also helpful, and I appreciate it. For more book reviews and Star Wars Book Celebration, follow Star Wars Book Reviews on Instagram and TikTok.